Hello students, today we'll do chapter of Heredity and Evolution, and topic covered in this video are journal introduction, Mendel and his laws of inheritance, and sex determination in human beings. So let's start. So let us start with journal introduction of the chapter. The living organisms which are produced as a result of sexual reproduction, they resemble their parents, but they are not the carbon copies of their parents. Means we will have some similar characters with our parents, but we are not exactly the same as that of our parents. So why we are not the carbon copies of our parents? This is due to variation. Due to variation, we are not the carbon copies of our parents. Now, this variation arises due to two main reasons. The variation due to which we are not the carbon copies arise due to two main reasons. First is due to error in DNA copying, due to mistake in DNA copying. We know that during reproduction, DNA copies, it replicates, and during the replication of DNA, if there is any mistake, this leads to variation. And second is crossing over during cell division. When there is exchange of genetic material between two homologous chromosomes, it is known as crossing over, and due to this crossing over during cell division, variation arises. Now, a question arises that when we see a sugarcane field, they resemble each other, whereas the human beings, they do not resemble each other. What is the reason behind it? The reason is that when we see a sugarcane field, the sugarcane is produced as a result of asexual reproduction, and variation in asexual reproduction are less as compared to sexual reproduction. So sugarcanes in sugarcane field resemble each other because they are produced as a result of asexual reproduction, and variation in asexual reproduction are less. So from this page we have made two conclusions that variation arises due to two reasons, and the variation in asexual reproduction are less as compared to sexual reproduction. Moving further, variations are of two types: useful variation and non-useful variation. Useful variations, or the variations which are good for the individual, they give survival advantage to the organism, whereas non-useful variations, they are eliminated by nature. Now, here a question arises, how can useful variation give survival advantage? I told you that the useful variation will give survival advantage. But how it gives survival advantage? Let us explain with the help of example. Suppose there are two bacteria A and B. The bacteria A has variation that it can survive under high temperature, whereas bacteria B does not have such variation to survive under high temperature. So when temperature would increase, we increase the temperature, then bacteria A, which has variation that it can survive under high temperature, would live, whereas bacteria B, which does not have the variation to survive under high temperature, will die. Hence, the variation, due to variation, bacteria A lives and bacteria B die. So this concludes that variation has survival advantage. Now let us understand Mendel and his laws of inheritance. Gregor Johann Mendel is also known as father of genetics. He worked for 7 years on pea plant. The scientific name of pea plant is Pisum sativum. Now, he worked on the seven pair of characters of pea plant. The 7 pair of characters of pea plant on which he worked are as follows: height of the pea plant, which is tall or dwarf; flower color, which is purple or white; flower position, which is axial or terminal; pod color, which is green or yellow; seed color, which is yellow and green; seed shape, which is round and wrinkled; flower color, which is purple and white; pod shape which is inflated and constricted. You have to remember that these characters are dominant and here the characters which are written are recessive. What do you mean by dominant and recessive would be covered later in the video. Now let us understand the first law of Mendel. The first law is known as law of paired factor. It states that every character is controlled by pair of factors, which means every character is controlled by two factors. Now let us understand this with the help of example. Let us consider the character of height. The character of height is controlled by two factors which are capital T, small t or capital T small t. So as you can see, every character which is here the example of character height is controlled by two factors. It can be either capital T, small t or capital T small t. Now moving on to second law, that is law of dominance. Before going through law of dominance, let us understand it with the help of example. Consider two factors which are capital T and small t. Now, if capital T is present, it will produce tall plant. So if capital T is present anywhere, it will produce tall plant. If small t is present, it will produce dwarf plant. And if there is small t, it will produce dwarf plant. But if both of them are present, that is, if capital T and small t are present, then the plant produced will be tall. So this means that when both dissimilar factors are present, which are capital T and small t, then one expresses itself and other remain an unexpressed. The factor which expresses itself is known as dominant factor, whereas which remain unexpressed is known as recessive character. Now it means capital T is dominant over small t. Capital T has kicked out the small t because capital T has expressed itself and small t has not expressed itself. Now with the help of this example, let us understand the law. So when two dissimilar factors of a character are present, for example, capital T and small t, one expresses itself, which is capital T, and is known as dominant, and other remain unexpressed, which is small t and is known as a recessive factor. Now, before understanding the next law of Mendel, let us understand monohybrid cross. Monohybrid cross is a cross in which only one character is studied at a time. For example, in this monohybrid cross, we have studied the character height. So a pea plant can be tall and or it can be dwarf. The genotype of the tall plant is capital T, capital T. The genotype of dwarf is small t. The gametes would be from here a capital T, from here a small t. When we will fertilize, the plant will be capital T, small t. But it will be tall because as per law of dominance, the capital T will express itself and the small t would not express itself, so the plant would be tall. Now, when we do selfing means crossing between same genotype, means capital T small t into capital T small t. This is known as selfing. So if we will do selfing of capital T small t into capital T small t, then we will have gametes as capital T, capital T, small t, and on fertilization, we will get the following results. Out of the 4 plants which are produced, 3 would be tall and 1 would be dwarf. So phenotypic ratio would be 3:1 because 3 plants are tall and 1 is dwarf. But genotypic ratio would be 1:2:1 because one plant has genotype capital T, 2 have genotype capital T small t, and 1 has genotype small t. So in a monohybrid cross, the phenotypic ratio is 3:1 and genotypic ratio is 1:2:1. Now let us understand third law, that is law of segregation. Now law of segregation, which is also known as law of purity of gametes, says that factors of a character separate at the time of gamete formation and each gamete gets only one factor for that character. Consider these are the two factors of a character. Let us consider these are two factors of a character. As you can see, these characters are separating at the time of gamete formation. So factor of a character separate at the time of gamete formation, and each gamete is getting one factor of that character. As you can see here, each gamete is carrying one factor of the character. So this is law of segregation. Now let us understand law of independent assortment. Before explaining the law of independent assortment, we should know what is dihybrid cross. In a dihybrid cross, two characters are studied. Now here we are studying two characters which are seed shape, round, wrinkled, and seed color which is yellow and green. So when we cross round yellow seed with wrinkled green seed, then the genotype of round and yellow would be capital R, capital R, capital Y, capital Y, because round and yellow are dominant over wrinkled and green. So their genotype would be small r, small r, small y, small y. So the gametes, when they will fertilize, they will produce capital R, small r, capital Y, small y. Now on selfing, capital R small r, capital Y small y with capital R small r, capital Y small y, we will get the following results. The gamete of capital R capital Y small y would be capital R capital Y, capital R small y, small r capital Y, small r small y. Similarly, the gametes here would be the same. So when we cross these gametes, we will get the ratio of 9:3:3:1, out of which 9 are round yellow, 3 are round green, 3 are wrinkled yellow, and 1 is wrinkled green. So law of independent assortment states that inheritance of one pair of contrasting trait or character is independent of other pair of contrasting trait or character, which means inheritance of round and wrinkled is independent of inheritance of yellow green. So this is law of independent assortment. Inheritance of one pair of contrasting trait, which is round and wrinkled, is independent of other pair of contrasting trait, which is yellow and green. Now let us look at sex determination in humans. Now we know in humans the male, which is father, has genotype of XY, whereas female mother has genotype of XX. The gamete produced by the father would be X and Y. The gamete produced by mother would be X and X. So when we fertilize this, 50% would become girl child and 50% would come as male child. So in sex determination of humans, we should know that father has XY genotype, mother has XX genotype, and 50% male child is born and 50% female child is born.